It only felt like yesterday since we had the FNAF and the Walking Dead PTBs. Time really does fly, doesn't it? The 9.2.0 PTB has been released, and with it comes our newest chapter based on Thai folklore, Sinister Grace. This chapter contains a new survivor, V Bunyasak, a killer, the Krasu, and unfortunately no new map. However, beyond the usual new stuff, we have a ton of new features and a Myers rework as well. And unfortunately for Killer, those said features are the dreaded anti-slug and anti-tunnel that's been feared about for a little while now. I've held off on covering this since I wanted to wait until we got the PTB patch notes for actual numbers, and now that they're here, what do I think of them and all the other changes? Let's hop right in because we got a lot to talk about. Unlike my other PTB reviews, I'm actually going to go in a little more depth with my thoughts on this rather than just lightning rounding everything. Starting us off with the more minor stuff that won't take us very long, Clown is getting the Afterpiece Antidote activating time and the Afterpiece Tonic's hinder duration partially reverted to what they were before the Walking Dead patch. If you want my honest opinion here, Clown shouldn't have gotten touched besides his accessibility issues, but I suppose this should help out with making him not as brain dead with the yellow bottles as well as making the purples more appealing again. Kaneki got the kidnapping byproduct of his power removed by allowing survivors to move as soon as he vaults instead of after. This is great. This was the main issue I had with Kaneki. I don't have many qualms with facing him personally outside of the whole kidnapping thing despite him being very unpopular to play against, so this should definitely help me and especially other people tolerate him a bit more. Oni gets 5 blood orbs when hooking people now. This is mainly because of the new anti-slug and anti-tunneling stuff they added this patch, which we will get back to later. But this is also just fine enough, even if it won't really do a whole lot to his gameplay loop in the grand scheme of things. Dracula's base kit got a side grade where the vampire's Hellfire was buffed at the cost of a bit of movement speed when holding it, Wolf got some pounce and scent orbs times nerfed, and Batform got a quality of life adjustment to make it easier to control. These themselves are fine. It isn't really going to impact his position as a top 5 killer very much, but he did get a bunch of his commonly used add-ons nerfed a bit as well, with a few of the lesser ones like Ring of Vlad, Warg's Fang, and Moonstone Necklace for example getting some buffs instead. Unknown got some add-on adjustments as well, my verdict on these being that there's a mix of both buffs and nerfs overall. The most notable one here is more of Blurry Photo becoming partially base kit and getting a nerf because of that, and thanks to Springtrap's existence according to the dev note, Unknown got the UVX angle uncapped, meaning it can now fire straight up if it wants to and go for some shots that it couldn't have gone for otherwise. The UVX also increases the weaken timer by 8 seconds instead of 6 when injuring a survivor now as well, so that's pretty cool. A ton of perks have gotten changed this patch as well, but not all of them I feel are very impactful or worth talking about, so in order to save on time, I'm only going to go over the ones that I feel stand out for both sides. If you want the full list, I'll leave the PTB patch notes in the description to see for yourself. For Survivor, Babysitter was reworked to now let the unhooker see the unhooked survivor and the killer's aura for 12 seconds. Borrowed Time now grants additional unhooked protection for 12 seconds. Hope got a 2% nerf. Off the Record no longer gives endurance in exchange for leaving no scratch marks when sprinting after being unhooked for 80 seconds. Plot Twist got buffed for some reason to also increase recovery speed by 25%. And Vigil no longer stacks, thank God. For killer perks, Barbecue and Chili was reworked and now rewards hooking everyone at least once with an additional 5% gen kick damage. Deadman's Switch got a deserved 15% nerf. Deerstalker was reworked to now let you see the survivor's auras anytime they see yours and reveal your aura to the survivor with the lowest chase time for 3 seconds, effectively making it sorta kinda like an object of obsession for killers. Eruption got a 5% gen damage nerf. Hex Ruin is now 150% regression. Pop Goes the Weasel got a very understandable 5% nerf thanks to the anti-tunnel's hook benefits. Oppression now works on 4 gens and got a 5-second cooldown reduction. And Pain Res got nuked from orbit with an insane 8% gen damage nerf, now making it 12% damage to a gen when putting someone on a Scourge hook for a first time. Out of all the perks for both sides, I'm fine with many of these, but Borrowed Time and Plot Twist getting buffed this much has me a little concerned thanks to the new systems in place. Deadman's Switch has been everywhere ever since its changes, and it's the main perk that makes Pain Res a lot stronger, so I'm perfectly fine with that perk getting nerfed. It had it coming in my opinion. Pain Res, I believe they changed because of the anti-tunnel system's hooking benefits combined with pop, but this still feels like a little excessive. Like, maybe 15% would have been a fairer number? Likewise, being able to take 25% off a generator after hooking someone unique made it extremely obvious that Pop was going to get a nerf, since 20% of current progress along with that and other perks would have absolutely been a little much, so I'm overall fine with that perk being what it is now. Overall, decent perk changes with reworks to a lot of the perks, mainly because of the new systems, but there's some in here that have me confused or concerned depending on their performance and if they'll make it out of the PTB or not. Now we move on to the meat and potatoes of the patch, starting with the Myers rework. Myers now has a stance change mechanic similar to Doctor's original iteration, where you can switch between Stalker mode and Pursuer mode. In Stalker mode, Myers moves at 4.2 meters per second, lacks a terror radius, and gains the ability to stalk survivors. The amount of stalk gained is faster when Myers isn't moving, and the maximum stalk range is 32 meters. In Pursuer mode, Myers moves at 4.6 meters per second, has a 24 meter terror radius, vaults 15% faster, and has a 10% increase to lunge attacks, damaging and breaking actions, and stun recovery speed. When stalking is fully charged up, which doesn't take very long by the way, Myers can manually activate Evil Within mode, granting him 40 seconds of access to a new attack called Slaughtering Strike, essentially giving him a coup de grace style lunge that can insta-down survivors hit by it. The lunge distance scales depending on how long he charges it for, but during the lunge itself, he has a little bit of a turning restriction until the lunge ends, although it isn't a whole lot. Slaughtering Strike also destroys pallets and walls, giving it some extra utility. In terms of how I feel about this, I actually really like this version of Myers more than the current one. Yeah, he took a small hit to his identity in order to get him out of bottom tier hell, but he still retains a lot of what makes Myers Myers beyond the lunge attacks, such as his stealth, stalking to become stronger, becoming a lot more threatening once he's powered up. He even doesn't have his stock cap anymore, and he has his old Tombstone add-on incorporated into his base kit, although now it only applies to people on Death Hook as opposed to just any time, making it far healthier to face. Honestly, I think the best part of it is that you know he can do it base kit now, as opposed to praying you didn't pack Tombstone piece, which was what frustrated me the most about that add-on. Its unpredictability thanks to it, being an add-on. Myers also got an add-on pass to compensate for the rework, as you would expect, and I can confidently say, for those of you who love Scratch Mirror Myers gameplay, they did not change that add-on, so you can still have fun with it. Additionally, if you really can't stand the Myers rework taking away a little bit of identity in favor of making him a lot better, or you really don't like Slaughtering Strike, Fragrant Tuft of Hair allows you to return to the old Myers gameplay if you so desire. Overall, I personally like this Myers a lot more than the current one, and the only real issue I have gameplay-wise is Stalker mode feeling a little bit sluggish and could maybe be buffed up to 4.4 meters per second. I'll definitely be using this killer a bit more once he's on live, although I will point out I was very upset by the fact that the wall and pallet breaking animation just uses the M1 animation as opposed to making a new animation. That was a bit of a letdown. Moving on, we have the anti-slug and the anti-tunnel changes. These, oh boy, we're gonna be here for a little bit. And by little bit, I mean this took up 2 pages of my script little bit. Call it wishful thinking if you want, but I held off on making a community post about these because I wanted to wait for the numbers attached to these things. But now that we've got them and I've seen and heard others' experiences with them, yeah, this needs some more time in the oven. So let me start off by saying these systems were designed to punish killers for extreme cases of tunneling and slugging gameplay. Like, I think everyone here can agree that tunneling someone out of the game at 4 or 5 gens is unnecessary, and slugging everyone as a win condition super early in the game as well is also very problematic. In these cases, I agree tunneling and slugging is problematic, but there's oftentimes killers have to employ these strats later in the game in order to secure high priority kills, especially if you're playing the lower to mid tier killers who just don't have the tools to keep up with efficient teams. It's not a matter of doing it because of BMing, it's just because you just gotta sometimes if you want to win against decent teams. Like, I don't actively tunnel or slug unless I have a reason to do so, such as someone's close by to try and go for a save, someone's gonna try and sabotage, I gotta kick a pallet or damage a gen, and especially if no one's dead or at least on death hook by 2 gens left, which is the time in the match a killer really needs to get moving and get someone out to avoid losing. Do I think these changes fixed the extreme cases of tunneling and slugging at 4 to 5 gens? Yes. but it also goes very much overkill and punishes the acceptable tunneling and slugging I just talked about, if that makes sense. Starting with the anti-slug system, essentially survivors recover on their own and have the ability to crawl, and if the anti-slug bar reaches a cumulative total of 90 seconds, then the survivor can get up by themselves for the rest of the game. In my opinion, this is the less egregious of the two systems, and it sounds innocent enough on paper, but in practice, this can get very abusable with perks involved or people are playing around with sabotaging, creating more lose-lose scenarios for the killer player even if they're not trying to slug intentionally. To be constructive about this instead of loudly complaining like I've heard a ton of people doing for honestly valid reasons, I think this system is a decent starting point, but the main flaws I'm noticing mainly stem from people being able to crawl and recover at the same time, as well as the 90 seconds being cumulative, making it abusable for Swifts. I would personally remove the crawling part and revert tenacity back to what it was currently, and make the timer slow down or stop entirely if one or more survivors are still up and are nearby the slug survivor, kind of like how the anti-face camp system works. Something like this I feel could still punish the egregious slugging we all hate, but not get in the way of killers just playing the game normally and making the right play in the right circumstances where slugging would be needed. As for the anti-tunnel system, most of this system I actually don't mind too much. Killers are rewarded for unique hooks by upping their next gen kick to basically 25% total, gaining a little bit of haste, and barbecue and chili becoming base kit. However, despite these being admittedly nice rewards, they still widen the power gap between the higher and lower tier killers, whether it be because of mobility issues or playstyle differences. Interestingly, Hillbilly, Ghoul, Dracula, Nurse, Blight, and Kursu all have lessened versions of these effects, which I actually think needs to be talked about more since I believe this is the first time Behavior has acknowledged how much better these killers are, besides maybe Kursu since she's still super new and no one's good with her yet, compared to the rest of the cast. The unhook protection was changed to include the usual effects, the brand new elusive status effect, unhooking players losing collision, killer instinct and AFK crow immunity, and 32 meter killer aura reveal for 30 seconds or until a conspicuous action is made, which I don't know why we increased that duration. 10 seconds was perfectly fine. I'd be fine with 15 seconds if we're feeling generous, but 30 feels like a bit much with all these bonuses in play, especially with borrowed time, making this 42 seconds instead. 30 seconds is enough time to cover most maps, so getting unhooked in the endgame is basically a free out with nothing most killers can do about it. The main problem of this system, however, comes in the form of the tunneling penalties and the hook status updates. Killers can see hook states now, which is admittedly really nice, but it came with the side effect of being unable to see who got hooked for 10 seconds, which severely hurts the killer's ability to play the macro game unless they proxy camp around the hook, or they have Floods of Rage or Jagged Compass in their build since those two perks bypass this system entirely. Jagged Compass in particular synergizes really well with the hook bonuses as well. I've been using it this entire PTB. I've always been a Jagged Compass enjoyer, so I'm glad this perk benefits a lot from the anti-tunnel system. The bigger issues, however, are the penalties. Starting with the lesser annoyance of the two, if a survivor dies from getting hooked on Death Hook or getting moried before 6 hook states, survivors get a 25% gen repair speed bonus for the rest of the game. This I actually feel wouldn't be too bad if it wasn't for the under 6 hook requirement and the fact that this can proc even if you do correctly tunnel someone out at 1 to 2 gens left to get someone out, as oftentimes if a survivor dies at around 3 to 5 gens, the game is typically a lost cause. So the bonus would be nice to give the rest of the team a better chance. With the tweaks of making this only take effect if the gen count is above 2 and the hook requirement being knocked down to below around 4 to 5 hooks, this would actually be a pretty decent punishment to tunneling someone out immediately early in the game as opposed to being punished for just playing the game the correct way in the late game where killers need to get someone out by that time to avoid losing. The other and the bigger issue of the punishments is if the survivor you previously hooked dies by getting hooked again or moried, gen regression and blocking no longer takes effect for the rest of the game. This just needs to get scrapped entirely. This is doing too much, especially since we already have a punishment alongside this. I would either keep this punishment, remove the other one, and give this one the below 4 to 5 hook requirement and get disabled once the gen count hits 2 or less, or scrap this one and keep the other punishment with the aforementioned changes. Both of these together in their current states just punish the killer for playing the game even without malicious intentions or those just playing casually. And these two systems plus the hook status changes are the main things everyone is rightfully voicing concerns and panicking about. I'm going to hold out hope that the severe outcry from the overwhelming majority is enough to make behavior put these systems back in the oven for a bit, or at the very least make some changes and refinements before going through with them. But if this ends up being the Walking Dead patch again and none of this changes or changes very little in the wrong areas, then I will gladly join everyone else with the pitchforks and torches at the ready. For our final bit of this PTB is the new killer and the new survivor, the Kresu and V Bunyasak. Starting with the Kresu, her gameplay loop is quite complicated, but also quite unique at the same time, so I'm going to break her power down bit by bit to make it easier to understand. The Kresu can switch between her body form, which is her default, and her head form. As the body, you move at 4.6 meters per second and are able to shoot a small, fast-traveling projectile that shoots into a bunch of little shrapnel upon hitting a wall, a ceiling, or a survivor, and it applies a leech status effect onto survivors hit by it directly or from the shrapnel. This leech status can tear up if left unattended, and the tearing will result in survivors becoming injured and broken until they find a glowing mushroom on the ground and consume it to gradually remove the leech. The base concept is very similar to how Plague's vomiting works when survivors are hit by it. This is all the leech does on its own, but the real power of this thing is that it allows Kresu to deal damage as her head form, the other form she can turn into. As the head form, Kresu plays in third person and moves at 4.8 meters per second, supposedly. I think she's bugged to be 4.4 instead on accident on the PTB, kinda like what Dracula had, and access to a whole host of stuff. The most impactful thing here is the headlong dash, a mobility tool that allows Kresu to fly along the ground at high speeds to get around the map as well as catch up to survivors. This dash gives Kresu no collision with survivors, and she regains collision the moment she stops the dash, making it very good for body blocking, but do keep in mind that it needs to have at least 25% of its charges available to be able to use this thing. Kresu in the head form cannot gain bloodlust and she cannot break pallets, but she is able to vault windows still, as well as she gains the ability to vault pallets, with the vault being around the same speed as the window one. This is not very useful at shorter loops and filler tiles, but this is really good at the stronger tiles where they're bigger, especially since survivors can't double back due to her still having collision, making this very good in those scenarios. Finally, Kresu can use her M1 to still attack survivors as the head form, but unlike the majority of killers where tapping the power will cause the attack to simply swing, while holding will create a lunge, Kresu's head form can only do the lunge, and the damaging hitbox seems to be a bit delayed on top of having restricted turning controls. This makes the attack very clunky to use and very hard to get used to, especially since it's easy for it to get caught in the environment and is another reason Kresu has trouble looping as the head form at filler tiles and smaller loops. This lunge attack is also not considered a basic attack by the game, so stuff like Surge, Rapid Brutality, etc. will not work with this killer very well. The attack will only injure if survivors have the first tier of leeching status at minimum, only filling a third of the status's first tier otherwise. This essentially means you have to use the body to get the first leech tier straight away instead of wasting time farming lunge hits on the head form. The main counterplay survivors have to Kresu is these little glowing mushrooms they can eat to gradually reduce the leeching status over time, and, if left uninterrupted, will fully cleanse the survivor and force Kresu to reapply the status. However, if you get hit by her during the cleansing process, the cleansing will stop and resume growing. To my knowledge, there's around 4 to 6 mushrooms already spawned at the start of the game, not sure of the exact number currently, but something the game doesn't tell you is that more will spawn every time Kresu turns into the head form, appearing where her discarded body despawns at after the transformation. Basically, Kresu's gameplay loop heavily involves macro play and knowing who's infected, where they are, and prioritizing going after those with the mushrooms effects, all while maximizing your value as the head form to minimize changing forms and thus limiting mushroom spawns. Thanks to this, I'm predicting she's going to have a bit of a learning curve for those that want to use her well, since mindlessly spamming the head transformation can spawn in too many mushrooms for the survivors to use. So far, I really like this killer, although it took me a while to get used to how she plays. As for her perks, Ravenous rewards hooking all survivors once with a 60-second exposed duration on all survivors. I can see this being good on M1 killers with mobility like Dredge, Sadako, Kaneki, and Wraith for example, but many of the high tiers likely will not be able to get use out of this. Hex, Overture of Doom, curses the farthest gen from the totem with your terror radius after a survivor works on it for 5 seconds, lasting 30 seconds and relocating to a different gen if the affected one's repaired. This perk giving free undetectable every now and then is really nice, but the main downside here is that it's obvious when it's in play when a survivor triggers it, and since it's the furthest gen, they can reverse engineer where the totem is. Finally, Wandering Eye reveals injured survivor auras within 16 meters of starting a chase with another survivor for 5 seconds before going on a 30-second cooldown. I personally think this is Krasu's worst perk, as there's very few killers who are going to use this well, and it mainly benefits from survivors being near each other, which is something you generally don't want as survivor. As for V Bunyasok's perks, 1, 2, 3, 4 is a perk similar to Bardic Inspiration, where you play music for survivors to increase their chances of getting skill checks by 20%, the effect lasting 90 seconds, and the perk's cooldown being the same duration. I can see this being problematic on very specific skill check builds, namely hyper-focused stakeout squads, but on your regular game, this perk probably won't be too bad to handle. Road Life is a perk that lets you gain tokens by hitting great skill checks when you're injured and not broken. Hitting 6 tokens will increase your heal speed by 100%, and you'll lose 2 tokens if you miss a regular skill check. Yeah, this is a perk. Pro tip, just run Botany Will Make It Do No Harm or literally any other healing perk. This is easily the worst perk of the patch and one of the worst perks in the game in general, at least as of the PTB. This can possibly change when it comes to live. Finally, Ghost Notes is a perk that recovers exhaustion 10% faster, and while exhausted, your scratch marks disappear 50% faster. This is fine enough on its own, but it pairs with Lightweight to make scratch marks disappear insanely fast, which can potentially be really annoying to deal with for killers struggling with tracking. Overall, okay-ish perk selection, very cool survivor, and a very unique killer that I am having a good time with. The only changes I'd give to Krasu as of writing would be to allow for more control on the lunge attack to make it less clunky, as well as adjust the movement speed when transitioning to the body form, as while transitioning to the head form is smooth. The other way around most certainly isn't. The Sinister Grace PTB is packed full of stuff to talk about and test out, and while a lot of it seems to be fine on paper, at least to me, there's some stuff in here that I think people are rightfully freaking out about, namely the anti-slug and the anti-tunnel mechanics. I personally think both of these are on the right track and behavior has the heart in the right place when addressing the more egregious and problematic parts of these strategies. There's a reason these strats are vital to playing killer against good players. These strats early on are very annoying and unfun, nobody's doubting that, but there's many instances where that's just the right move, and punishing the correct move just punishes killers for playing the game as opposed to simply just punishing people abusing these strategies early on to make the game miserable for everyone on purpose. At least the rest of this patch seems to be fine in comparison, with just some minor tweaks here and there, mainly on Krasu and the Myers rework. If you enjoyed the video and want to see more, feel free to like, subscribe to the channel, and join the community Discord. Let me know in the comments what you think about this PTB, whether it be the new systems, Krasu, Myers, all that jazz. Just keep it constructive, alright? And with that in mind, cheers!